Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi. And today we're going to be getting into after round 8 sleepers. So we did our favorite picks in rounds 1 through 8. And now we're just going to have a list of players post round 8 that we really like. First guy up has become the darling of the offseason as his role seems to be expanding. And as everybody gets more and more excited about the rookie class during redraft season. So Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. No Chris Godwin to start the year likely, although he did come off PUP this morning. I was surprised to see that. But then obviously Jalen McMillan suffered a serious neck injury as well. So he might be out for at least the first half of the year. And that was a severe neck strain, not anything more serious than that. But it does look like Egbuka is in position to be the number 2 and that they don't really have a lot of competition for targets behind him and Evans to start the year. So we were even talking, I feel like this is somebody that's primed to be ranked at wide receiver 20 in week 1 just because the Bucs offense is great. Baker's going to be slinging it. Baker has not had enough good things to say about Egbuka throughout the entire camp. And so it just feels like wheels up here in a major way. If he goes out and gets 8-10 targets in week 1, we're all going to be wishing that we had pushed him up even further than wide receiver 32 that I have him at.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I feel like the over-under on targets week 1 is going to be 8.5 because, we see that Baker is just going to be slinging it and they're playing the Falcons. Like all stars are pointing up for Egbuka. And I think maybe this is a little bit cheating at this point to have him as a sleeper, but ADP hasn't fully adjusted and we're kind of just going off the Fantasy Pros ranking. And these are all guys outside the top 100 really. So he's someone that, if you're drafting this weekend or whenever you are drafting, just don't be afraid to push him 2 rounds above ADP. Don't get cute with it. Don't think you can play the ADP game. Don't think that somebody else in your league isn't going to be all over this guy because he's someone that is going to have a huge role in this offense. And, they did activate Godwin off PUP, but I was reading that they're looking to have him start practicing again week 2 with the goal of being on the field in October. So he's going to have a ton of runways. This was his calling card coming out of college, just the consummate professional, just, going to do everything right. He's been an excellent player at Ohio State, all-time leading receiver. And we know the history of the wide receivers that school produces. So he's someone who you and I are drafting on Saturday, and it's going to be a race to see who gets him on their squad.
Next guy up is Tank Bigsby. So I've been touting Tank Bigsby for a while now, I feel like. And, obviously there's been reports about him being the number 1 in camp. He played with the ones in the second preseason game after not really playing with the ones in the first preseason game after ETN got most of the work. But I think this too is a little bit just more of what we saw last year, in that Bigsby looked significantly better as the rusher last year over ETN, and ETN was more of the pass catcher. So you see the 766 yards, you see the 7 touchdowns, and I think that he's going to have that role. So I think basically I'm going to take a shot in Jacksonville, it's going to be on Tank Bigsby. I don't think ETN is going to be the lead back, although it is nice to know that the trade rumors have kind of died off. That was another big thing that was maybe swaying me in the offseason. But they also, right, we were just talking this morning about Bashal Tutin, and they obviously have him for trying to generate explosive plays. So that could come on stretch runs and that could come in the passing game, both things that would eat into ETN's workload, I think, more than it would into Bigsby's. I just would be picking him amongst the group. And if I ever did have to play him, just hoping that he's able to break a long run, possibly score a touchdown, get that double-digit point mark. But, obviously that's less upside than maybe ETN would have if he has a 6 or 7 catch game, or Tutin would have if he breaks a 60-yard touchdown. But, I just feel like the role is the safest of the 3. And so that's just the one I'm going to be targeting.
Yeah, it's been fun all summer to follow along fantasy Twitter, where everyone thinks they know exactly how this backfield is going to shake out. And after week 1 in the preseason, they're so in the know. Don't listen to anyone that says they know exactly what's going to happen, right? Like we're all just guessing here, and it could be a rotation, and maybe the coaches don't even know at this point. But from my thought process is, I would guess that they want Bigsby to fill in that Bucky role, obviously the ETN with the Rashad Wright role, and then the Sean Tucker role filled, by the young hotshot rookie. And, maybe we see the rookie cutting in more playing time if he really is the real deal, but, we just don't necessarily know at this point. So I think all of their ADPs are pushed down enough that it is worth taking a shot. And at this point, I'm kind of with you on Bigsby because you know, obviously ETN had that RB3 season a couple years ago, but that was just on some monster volume with a different coaching staff. So, and I think the other thing too that I like about these guys is that, you know, Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter is going to draw so much of defensive attention, and Cohen, you know, orchestrated such a strong run game in Tampa Bay that this could work out nicely. Now their offensive line isn't as good as the Buccaneers, but, you know, good coaching can kind of mask some of that.
Next guy up is Matthew Golden. So I feel like the shine of, you know, the rookie part of him has worn off a little bit, because he was getting talked about just a couple weeks ago as wide receiver 1 for the Packers, that he was going to be their target leader. There were a lot of clips of him, you know, getting open with ease, all that type of stuff. So, but now it feels like it's kind of worn off, and I feel like he's not necessarily getting talked about as much, or isn't getting as much hype as maybe Pearsall and Egbuka are right now. But I do still think that he should be going right there with those guys, because if he is in this number 1 role and they do end up trading or cutting Romeo Doubs, like has been kind of reported, he might be one of the only game in town for like the volume role, right? We know Jaden Reed is a downfield explosive player, and Watson is hurt currently, and then Dontavian Wicks can't catch the ball. So, you know, it could be just him and Kraft as like the 2 volume guys, with Reed being the deep play or the explosive threat of the offense. So I'm getting more and more excited about Golden, especially if Dobbs isn't on the team. So I'll be following that closely, but you know, don't let Golden slip too far in your drafts. I feel like even early in the offseason, he was getting buried in the receiver rankings when we started talking about him. And then now it's just, he's fallen behind these other young, exciting players, and I'm not even sure that he should be.
Yeah, this is the type of guy when you're on the clock and you're looking at your draft board, and it's like Matthew Golden and Khalil Shakir. And, you know, Shakir is banged up right now, but we know, you know, he's more of a floor play. But with Golden, I mean, it's too much upside to pass up on. And Jaden Reed, he's banged up right now. Wicks is banged up as well. There was a recent report where Love is throwing to those guys, but they're not moving. That, you know, they can't necessarily move right now. And then even when Reed is healthy, we saw last season he had a 63% snap share, which I still think is a mistake by the coaching staff, because I think Jaden Reed's a really good player. And then with Dobbs, I was kind of in the camp earlier in the offseason that he would get traded to the Steelers just to kind of reconnect with Aaron Rodgers. But now it's just like with Wicks and Reed banged up, I'm not necessarily sure that happens. But either way, Dobbs isn't really a high target guy anyway. I kind of flipped my tune on Golden because, I mean, for one, I took him in our rookie draft, but going into it, I was like, you know, he wasn't super productive at Houston. He transferred to Texas. At that point, a year ago, it was looking like Isaiah Bond was going to be like a 1st or 2nd round pick. And then obviously you see Ryan Wingo when he has the ball in his hands, just completely electric. And then Golden just shows out at the combine, 4.29, does everything right. So I'm getting more excited about him. Again, like I talked about with Egbuka, don't be afraid to push him up around if you want to go get him.
Yeah, and I like the comment that he wasn't overly productive in college, and I feel like that's been holding you back on Golden in terms of redraft value, just because we haven't really seen a breakout season from him. So I think that might be coming this year, especially if they get back to throwing the ball more in Green Bay. I think
they're going to have to. They're going to have to. Their defense isn't going to be good enough to just run it 35 times.
Yeah, definitely not. So to keep that in the back of your mind too for Josh Jacobs too, because, you know, he exploded over the second half of the year because he was just getting loaded with volume. He'll still be good, but, you know, the passing game should rebound. The next guy up here is Darnell Mooney. And so since he's hurt with the shoulder injury, I feel like he's been falling in ADP, which I like a lot, right? I still think that he's going to be worth owning, and the later you can get him, the better. And especially early in the year, there's no bye weeks. Everybody's out there playing. You're not going to need him necessarily through the first month of the season. So if he does get it rolling by that point, you get bye weeks, you get any injuries that you're also fielding, and you end up needing to use him, then I think that's even better for his overall value, basically, is what I'm getting at. So I don't anticipate starting him early. I do hope that he is able to get healthy and out there. Obviously, that would be better for his value overall, but I do think we're looking at using him maybe starting in week 5, probably, unless you have just a ton of injuries early in the year. So overall, I'm still in on Darnell Mooney, but despite the injury, and that's why I put him on here. I just wanted to highlight the fact that I feel like he's still in a great position with this offense to be productive this year.
Yeah, and it is a shoulder injury too. I would be more concerned if it was like a hamstring or soft tissue or something along those lines. And you said it best with not necessarily needing him, but for me, it's just when you make this switch from Kirk Cousins to Michael Penix, and Darnell Mooney's a good downfield player anyway, we know Penix likes to sling the ball, and he is very aggressive. He's going to put it in some tight windows, and guess what? If one of those is intercepted, it does not go against Mooney. So I'm definitely in on him as a late round guy. I mean, behind them, it's Ray McLeod. They just don't really have a whole lot of depth. And I know we're kind of back to the point where people are starting to try to make Kyle Pitts a thing again for whatever reason, but I'm just not going to ever be there. And if Kyle Pitts finishes as a top 6 guy, guess what? So is another guy that's going to be on the waiver wire week 3. So that's just not something that I'm leading into. So, London is a huge target of mine. I talked about that in my favorite pick in round 2. But if I do miss on that, Mooney's definitely someone I want to take a shot on late.
Yeah. And I've heard some speculation too that Mooney's injury might lead to even more targets for Drake London. So, if he misses games early in the year and London's getting just 15 targets a game, that's going to be a wild thing to see. Everybody that picked him is going to be very happy early in the year if Mooney's not out there. Now, I don't think that'll maintain if Mooney's missing time, but overall, I think that's an interesting thing to think about getting off to a hot start with Drake London. All right, next guy up is Austin Ekeler. The reason we have him on here for this one is obviously Ja'Cory Crockett-Merritt is getting all of the buzz with the news that they're going to be moving on from Brian Robinson Jr., but I don't know that that's necessarily where the excitement should be. The old boring veteran is the one I'm more excited about, Austin Ekeler. So, you see here on his player card, he's viewed as a key piece of the offense. And, he's going to get his passing work, even with Jaden Daniels in a low volume off passing offense. And with Daniels running as much as he did, he still saw 41 targets in 12 games last year. So extrapolate that up. If he is viewed as somebody that's going to keep that role, he could get 60 or 70 targets in this offense. And if he does and maintains any sort of efficiency like 10 yards per catch, he's going to have a really hard time failing here if he gets any work on the ground, So if he's getting 5 to 8 carries and then he's going to get 70 targets, that's definitely going to be in flex consideration, especially in your PPR leagues. And he's free. I don't necessarily know if it's what's going to happen with the Brian Robinson Jr. thing. I don't have a way to know. It seems like they're going to move on from him. It seems very interesting that they'd go this public, that they're talking about cutting him, that there's talk about trading him, that multiple teams are interested. But I think personally that the player that this helps the most is Ekeler, not necessarily Ja'Cory Crockett-Merritt, as much as the social media hype around him has exploded.
I think the fact that the broadcast booth was talking about the impending Brian Robinson trade just kind of shows that, like you said, they are looking to move on. And I think with, Bill Krosky-Merritt, that it's a little bit twofold. So on the one hand, I'm very happy to see the NCAA come into light for how much they screwed this guy over, and people are talking about it. And I think that's great. That's, there's reasons he fell in the draft too, but taking a step back, there's a little bit of shades of last year with like the Carson Steele hype that was getting a little bit out of control. Now I think Bill Krosky-Merritt is better than Carson Steele, but I don't want to get too over our skis because, like you said, 41 targets in 12 games on an elite offense. And we know what type of player Ekeler is. And not to mention last season, like he was going into the year with a high ankle sprain, right? Like there were other things going on too. And, even to finish wide receiver 34 on 12 games behind Brian Robinson isn't like awful. Like you could have plugged and played him in certain spots. So I think, this is someone that I've been taking a ton of in best ball over the last few weeks. And I'm sure his ADP has risen quite a bit, although I'm seeing Krosky-Merritt in like round 8 or something at this point. People are getting out of control. But anyways, all that being said, all that being said, he's free. And if it doesn't work out and they keep Robinson or JCM is, the next Bucky, like you can just cut him. It's okay.
Yeah, and so I just think we look in the backfield for those receiving backs all the time, and I feel like Ekeler might resume having a pretty good role in that aspect in a really good offense. So I'm pretty excited to draft Ekeler. All right, our next guy here is a second-year player, Keon Coleman. I am extremely excited to draft Keon Coleman. I feel like it's been nothing but hype and good news out of Bills camp around this guy. We all know he's a great locker room presence, good personality, and has really taken his offseason prep seriously this year. You hear guys saying night and day versus how he was last year to this year. And ideally, the over the middle of the field, the volume type of targets are going to be coming his way this year. So that's going to be how he pays off. Can't just be all boundary stuff or all boundary targets, because then, like similar to Marvin Harrison, right? It just is so unreliable game to game. You don't have a consistent enough role. You're not getting open enough to garner targets. So overall, I do think that is coming, though. And you look at his last season's line, and it's like 29 receptions for 556 yards. So clearly that's a lot of downfield work. That's almost 20 yards a catch, but that isn't necessarily going to be translating into this year, I don't think. I'm thinking he's going to get more intermediate targets. He's still going to maintain some level of downfield role, and that ideally he'll be able to take that major step forward and become somebody that we put into flex consideration this year.
Yeah, I'm trying to contain my excitement with him a little bit because I was so in on him last year. Like he was just one of my favorite players coming out of the draft. And, obviously the personality is infectious. And there were so many things that, I'm a sucker for these two sport athletes. Obviously he played basketball similar to like Drake London, his freshman year at USC. But if you scroll up on his player card and you go to, I think it was like week 7 and 8, I want to say, like right before he got injured. Yeah, he got 7 targets a game. So he was starting to click a little bit, and then he suffered the injury and wasn't really the same. So I know this offense, there's a lot of mouths to feed. But again, if we look back a year ago, this was Josh Allen's target in the draft. He said, "You're the guy I want, like move up, go get me." Or, I guess technically they moved back, but they knew they were going to have the ability to draft him. So again, not the fastest guy in the world, but I know we kind of belabored this point a year ago where it's like, okay, he was the fastest gauntlet time drill. So I think if all those things start to click, we know he's a phenomenal athlete. We know this offense is elite. We know, he plays above the rim, which is good for the backyard style football Josh Allen plays when he's kind of running around in the red zone. So again, I've got my guard up a little bit because I don't want to be burned again, but I hope nothing more than he has a great season.
All right. And then these last two guys are going to be two vets, starting off with Nick Chubb, because it's starting to look like he might just have the starting role to open the season. And if that is the case, if, for example, Brian Robinson Jr. doesn't get traded here, this is somebody that I'm comfortable taking a flyer on. Obviously, had that horrific knee injury 2 years ago, came back last year, just wasn't the same. And so, what can we expect really from him? Not much, I don't think, but taking a late round shot on him, I think can be worth it, because if he looks good in week 1, he's immediately going to be the top waiver wire claim if he does not get drafted in your league. Yeah. So he looked decent in the preseason game. He had 5 carries, 25 yards. So he averaged 5 a carry. He had 2 targets, only caught one of them for like 5 yards. But we know he's not a big time receiving back in any means. So he'll mostly be just running. And so the fact that he's out there, that he's looking okay, that he's expected to start the season as the one, I think makes him worth it at the beginning of the year. Again, somebody that you're probably not going to play, but just put him on your team as your last pick or second last pick. And then if it does pan out in week 1, you kind of got ahead of the waiver wire with that pick.
Yeah, I was going to say, even if he doesn't get drafted and you're going to be moving guys potentially into those IR spots before week 1, he's definitely someone that you want to take a shot on. And I will say it kind of feels similar last year to when the Chiefs brought in Kareem Hunt, and he didn't look great and he was washed and all these things, but he was productive from a fantasy perspective. And I think, the fact that they brought in Woody Marks is a really nice compliment to be used in the receiving game. And we know this offensive line is kind of a mess, but when you bring in a new OC that maybe can scheme things open a little bit more. And, they have the threat of CJ Stroud and obviously Nico Collins and a couple young receivers that I like as well. He can get a little bit of runway. So if they're scoring points, they're banging it in with him in the end zone or on the goal line, can have some value. But again, an extremely boring pick, but could pan out.
Yeah, but again, this one's really late, right? We're looking now outside of players that are getting drafted. Both of these guys are not even in the top 60 in rankings that you'll look at in general. So yeah, definitely going deeper with these guys than the guys we started the list with. And that brings us to our last player here, Keenan Allen. So he re-signs with the Chargers. Obviously, we're fired up as Charger fans about that just in general, but I do think that there's value here in a way that the market hasn't adjusted to at all. Obviously, Ladd McConkey is still going to be the number one. And McConkey's still, I'm guessing, going to move inside and outside. I don't think his role is going to change. So I know Keenan played in the slot a lot when he was on the Chargers, but I don't know that he's going to just have that role and they're going to push Ladd out. I think Ladd is going to continue to play both. He did in the preseason game, even after they signed Keenan. So I think Keenan maybe plays a little bit more outside, but will fill the slot role when Ladd's outside. And I fully expect him to be the number 2 wide receiver. I definitely think he's going to beat out Trey Harris. Quentin Johnston obviously has the concussion, but I think he's going to beat him out and be probably the number 2, if not the number 3 target for Justin Herbert. There's been a lot of reports that it just looks like they've picked up where they left off. He had a pretty solid season last year, despite obviously a big step back, but it was with the Bears. They were kind of just all over the place. He missed 2 games, but still scored 7 touchdowns, still had 70 catches for 750 yards, that type of thing. So I do think that there's still value here with Keenan Allen. Any given week, I feel like he could definitely be productive for your team, and somebody that if he gets off again to a quick start, everybody's going to be rushing to get him. And I definitely think I don't know. When he signed, I was like, is it bad that I just want to put him in my top 20 wide receivers? Because it's just like, he's Keenan Allen, but, obviously didn't do that. But I do still think very worth a dart throw at the end of your draft.
Yeah, and he was still able to get 121 targets last year, sharing the field with DJ Moore and number 9 overall draft pick Rome Odunze. And I don't think we can discount the fact that he's coming back home to California. He's reuniting with his old quarterback. They've obviously got that chemistry. So I don't know why he hasn't gotten pushed up at all. But he's definitely someone that I think is worth targeting. And you mentioned with week 1, if he goes off, I mean, they're playing the Chiefs week 1, right? Like Chiefs have the ability to put up points and maybe have a good there's just a scenario where Herbert's going to have to throw the ball a lot, right? So if he's getting 9 targets, then yeah, absolutely. So I'm excited about him. I'm excited for this reunion, and hopefully he's got one last good ride in him.
All right, and with that, that's our sleepers for the 2025 season. We look forward to talking to you the next one.